inculcated itself into my imagination. But that was really drawn upon the Norse pantheon of Mighty Thor is a very popular comic character in America.
Mm.
And that was one of my favorites. I mean, I remember actually sitting in church, sort of tuning out the sermon and just picturing myself as the Mighty Thor with my hammer, trundling across the tundra with the wind whipping through my hair and the snow and the ice giants, and I just loved that. It was just really captivating to me. I was really immersed in that whole mythology.
Mm.
And it was really beautifully done in the 60s by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, two of my personal heroes, my two personal gods.
Mm.
There was also another character named Dr. Strange who was an occult magician. And this character was so compelling to me. One of my favorite characters, and was very much of a loner character, very isolated, but had these incredible powers and had these powers to traverse dimensions. And later on, in later stories in the 70s, he would deal with the Rosicrucians and the occult founding of America and things like that. The writers and artists were very much, looking back, as I do in this book, and finding the same links and the same roots.
Yeah, interesting. So, are you saying here that picking up books, like, for instance, Talisman by Graham Hancock, Bevol, and even looking at stuff that Tracy Twyman writes about and Kenneth Grant, has this been with you all the time? Or, I mean, this kind of information or those kind of authors that I mentioned there, have those people been around, for a long time in your life? How did you discover them, so to speak?
I discovered that stuff more or less. I really became really immersed in Carl Jung and Jungian psychology maybe about 15, 20 years ago. And that leads you in all sorts of interesting directions. It's kind of a gateway. And it's almost like, pre-internet linking, that you'll read, somebody will mention something in one book and you'll go to another book. And also getting on the internet at a very early point in the game, there were a lot of people who were interested in these sort of topics who were very much at the forefront of technology.
Mm-hmm.
Again, sort of this hidden knowledge. And there was, when I was studying mysticism and studying Jungian psychology, there would be people who would spam these news groups on the internet that I would be reading with all this sort of conspiracy theory material, and I had no idea what this was about.
Mm-hmm.
So I sort of started following those connections as well. But I will say, very interesting. I mean, I grew up in a Masonic family. I've never had any, membership in the Freemasons, but I went to a school that was a specialty school for comic book artists, and I received a scholarship from the Eastern Star. So my first real inside knowledge of the Freemasons was going to this giant Freemasonic convention in Worcester, Massachusetts, and I was just stunned by it. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. It was amazing, and it was so ritualistic. And there would be these processions, and then this music, and these incantations, as it were. It was an amazing experience for me. I was completely oblivious to the meaning of it all until much later. But sort of foreshadowing of what I would do later on. Yeah.
Yeah. Were you young at this point, or?
I was 18. Yeah.
Okay. So okay, so you have that kind of background and seeing these images. So when you started, do you think that, let's turn it around, let's say, do you think that those kind of experiences have led you to pursuing the work to work with comics and write about it and write for it and illustrate and all of that?
It's hard to say. I mean, I'm interested in these subjects, as research. I'm not a practicing member of any society or group or church or cult or anything. I'm really very much on my own.
Sure.
But the comics programmed me almost from a very early age to really have my eyes open to this material, because a lot of the people writing comics, again, were very much interested in the stuff, and that's something I cover in the book. And I'll tell you something very interesting. When I was doing research for this book, I interviewed a woman named Catherine Ironwood, who was very well known in comics fandom circles, and also very much involved in neo-paganism. and she said something very, very clear. She said that neo-paganism would not have gotten its start without comics and science fiction fandom.
Mm-hmm.
Modern neo-paganism really grows out of comics and sci-fi fandom, and the clearest example of this is that the OTO, the leader of the OTO, was a guy named Grady McMurtry,
Mm-hmm.
who was very much involved in science fiction fandom. And, when I studied this book, I discovered that Jack Parsons was very much involved in this stuff.
Yeah.
Jack Parsons would speak before the Los Angeles Science Fantasy Society and had a lot of contacts with science fiction writers, and that's where he met L. Ron Hubbard, which is another thing I cover in the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a fascinating story, definitely. And there's lots to say about that, and maybe we can talk more about that later when we talk a little bit about Crowley and the connections between those guys. That's very interesting. What I want to ask you, I guess, is considering what we talked a little bit about, with your background and so forth, and how you said that the comic books kind of spawned this introduction of what you call neo-paganism almost. But it feels to me that many people that are reading comics actually don't take the step that you have done, meaning that they go into studying the occult or actually become very smart or astute in picking up, symbolism in the architecture and so forth. Maybe that's just, maybe I got the wrong idea. Maybe many of the people, that are into comics are very astute within this field and know everything what they're looking about. But it doesn't feel like it. What's your idea of this? What's your sense of this?
Well, sometimes I feel like I'm a special case because, like I said, I came from this family on both sides that were very much involved in Freemasonry. We were also very religious family. The church was very much a focus point for my family. And my mother, who was a professional musician, also played the organ with the choir director at a Jewish temple. And on Saturdays, I would go to Catholic Mass with my friends because I lived in a predominantly Catholic neighborhood. So I sort of grew up steeped in these religious traditions. I mean, pretty much my entire weekend would be religious ceremonies. So I had a very interesting outlook on that.
Mm.
Also, I just was really enamored of mythology. When I was very young, I loved reading the ancient fables and the ancient myths. Edith Hamilton, which we studied in school. And actually, this is a funny story. I told you my fascination with Thor and the Norse mythology and stuff. When I was in 6th grade, I was involved in a production that was entitled Death of the Sun God. It was the school play. It was the 6th grade school play, and it was basically the story of Loki and Balder. And I played Mistletoe. I don't know if you're familiar with that myth at all, but Loki wants to kill Balder, and Frigga goes around to all the plants and animals of the world and has them promise that they won't harm Balder. But the only one she overlooks is Mistletoe. So I got to play Mistletoe.
That's nice.
So I had almost like an immersive experience with this.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun. But again, that was another experience that really made me delve deeper into this mythology.
Definitely.
And, I had a pretty troubled upbringing, had a pretty difficult and troubled childhood. So I was always looking for escapist, fantasy, entertainment. So comics and mythology were very much, a refuge for me from a very troubled childhood.
Yeah. Interesting, that many people seem to cling to against superheroes, and again, this kind of leads us into this idea that I want to talk a little bit about now, and this is of course the connection with the more ancient gods or the mythologies of the ancient world, basically. Again, these are stories that have been around for a long time. We could talk about Gilgamesh, Horus. We can talk about Greek, Roman myths, or what you just mentioned, the North saga here. There's so many here, and it seems to be that these are kind of archetypal stories that are retold in different versions all the time and renewed all the time. One thing that you bring up in the book is Gilgamesh, of course, the Sumerian story. Would you say that this is one of the first kind of superhero stories that actually is around.
Exactly. I mean, it's the funniest thing is if you look at the earliest literature that we have in our Western canon, you know, it's predominantly superhero oriented. I mean, not only Gilgamesh but Beowulf and Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey, the 12 Labors of Hercules, the Contentions of Horace and Set. So much of the earliest literature in the Western canon is superhero material, and it almost stems from this childlike, magical view of reality that I think was very prevalent in the ancient world before science and technology had taken over.
So this is a way, I guess, to retell all the stories, because again, if we go through many of the mythologies and many of the characters in the mythologies, we can see that it's a constant retelling of this story. It's a constant idea that is coming back again, kind of archetype that I mentioned. Do you think that all these comic books then that we have before us now, and what have consequently happened, of course, is that this has moved into, you know, film and taken a whole new life there, basically. But these stories again are coming to us again from the ancient world and a retelling. Do you think there is a need, you know, within, you know, human and especially young people, maybe teenagers, to have these kind of stories around them? And is that the fact why they are so, you know, mesmerized almost by them?
I think it's a need in everyone. You know, I mean, not only children and teenagers, but adults go see these movies. And, you know, we have an experience where adults, you know, are clinging to this material later and later on in life. I mean, you have people who grew up with this stuff being very powerful in their experience and very powerful in their lives, and they don't let go of it because it's very meaningful to them. And consequently, the subject matter in the comics has matured and grown up with the audience, at least in mainstream American comics. I mean, they really are written for an older audience. And I'll give you an example. When I was in high school, I worked in a comic book store, and the clientele was largely teenage kids. And if we saw somebody older come in, it was like, what is he doing in here?
Yeah.
But today, the average age of, you know, comics fan is probably in the mid to late 20s. So the material has matured and has stayed compelling to people. But the same energy that we see in these comics is the same energy that's making these films so powerful. And we've got to talk about 9/11 here, because 9/11 is such a traumatic experience for so many people that you naturally look towards these kind of characters again. And I think if you look at the first Spider-Man movie, which came out the following spring, you know, you have this spectacle with the Green Goblin is, you know, running around destroying all these landmarks in Manhattan. And I think that really resonates with people. And you saw the same thing in the Batman Begins movie.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we'll leave out the politics and the sort of the diverging views on that whole experience. I mean, that's really almost irrelevant to this conversation. What the effect was is that people felt that they were threatened, vulnerable. And the same thing is happening, you know, that the world is so incredibly chaotic and turbulent right now. So people will, you know, very much be gravitated towards these strong characters. And the danger of that is that we don't want a situation that we saw in the 30s, you know, where there was that same need for a strong man, and then we saw the rise of basically totalitarianism as a result of that.
Yeah.
So there is a danger in this. There's a danger inherent in these kinds of impulses. But I would say this, the healthiest way that we can express these impulses, the healthiest way that we can explore, you know, issues of like occultism or alchemy or gods or paganism, I think is in fantasy, you know, fantasy entertainment. To me, that's the best place for this material to go. It's the healthiest place, because we can act these things out, you know, without them sort of bleeding over into uncomfortable real life, you know, cults and strong men cults and things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I really think that the best way to immerse yourself in this material is in that context.
Oh, that's interesting.